Hi, everyone, and thank you again for joining us for this month's Probing the Literature Journal Club. This month is Medical Education and Admin, so we're going to just do it a little bit differently. We are actually, as always, the rules: turn on your camera, mute yourself, and then change your screen name so we know who you are. We actually have a few guest speakers as well as a video recording from one of our docs. We have Dr. Wilma Chan, Dr. Creagh Bougler, Dr. Amy Kule, and then Dr. Chris Fox, who's actually joining us in spirit, but wanted for me to also give his name out in case anyone had any questions in regards to developing a medical education program. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go through and ask our panel participants a variety of questions in regards to establishing a medical education program where you're integrating ultrasound into the education of med students. And first, I'm going to show the video of Dr. Chan, and as she addresses the questions, and then I'm going to feature Dr. Clay and Dr. Amy to just give us a little bit of their background in regards to these questions. We'll go back to the video, and then we'll go back to our live panelists. So as the first question state, what's your approach to med ed? How was it established from the actual time of your first session? How long did the process take? And then who is funding these?
Hi, everyone. I'm Wilma Chan. I'm the Director of Ultrasound Education at the Perelman School of Medicine at UPenn. I am an EM faculty member at Penn, and this is now my 8th year in this position. Sorry I couldn't join you guys today, but I was approached by Monika to answer some questions that were posted and sent to me. So hopefully this is helpful for most of you. Feel free to email or call me, text me if you want. I will include my contact info to send out to Monika if you need to reach out to me for any reason. So I'm just going to go one by one through the questions. My first question here is, were you approached by the med ed group to establish this, and from the actual time of the request until the first session, how long did the process take? So this was in 2015. My colleagues who were at Penn had already piloted a short program, I think over the course of one semester, to see that this program was feasible, and the machines that they were using had already been acquired through a foundation, a family foundation grant that was given to the school. So there was a whole application process prior to my arrival. The family foundation had donated close to $1 million, I believe, at that time to acquire machines, a faculty person, space, equipment, supplies, and that was to be used over the course of, I believe, like 3 years. So all that was kind of already set in place more or less prior to me arriving. And so part of that agreement in that grant proposal was to acquire a faculty person to oversee this. And so I was part of that a grant. So I was already written into a grant before I arrived. So that's very unusual. And so that is a huge blessing for me. I didn't have to do much of the heavy lifting when it came to seeking funds on the startup. So I don't know what the answer is to the rest of that, but I think it took about 2 years probably officially from beginning to end of the writing portion to the awarding of the money, and then the hiring of myself arriving. So I think it was at least 2 years, if not closer to 3 probably, from looking at the documents of the initial proposal. So not an insignificant amount of time. And this answers question number 2, is this a med school funded position? Yes. And at the time I had started, the agreement was that my position would only be funded for 3 years. And so there was this kind of cloud hanging over my head and question mark really as to whether or not this would sustain. And it was pretty clear, I think, by the end of year 1, there was just so much interest and so much traction that we knew it was probably going to succeed. And then kind of gaining some visibility through the administrators to really set in stone that my position would be more permanent. And not just that, but also the hiring of a sonographer educator. So a sonologist, a sonographer by training through the radiology track. So our ultrasound techs, we have a person that we work with, Christy Moore, who has been a sonographer for, I would say, 3 decades. She came on, and also getting her position fully funded, permanently funded, not fully funded, but permanently funded, was just as equally important. Around like 2016 was when she came in, and I believe just 2 years ago, it was permanent that her position was going to be funded by the school independently from any other additional grants and outside supplement.
So that was actually Dr. Wilma Chan. She's an associate professor of emergency medicine and the director of ultrasound education at Perelman School of Medicine, University of Pennsylvania. And for our panelists for our discussion, we have Dr. Creagh Bougler. She's the Associate Director, Division of Ultrasound. She's a professor of EM at The Ohio State University. Don't forget the. And then we also have Dr. Amy Kule. She's the Vertical Curriculum Director of EM and Point of Care Ultrasound, the Department of Emergency Medicine at Loyola University Medical Center. So thank you both for joining us. And I would like for you to kind of address these questions from your experience. How long did it take you to establish the program? And from the actual ask, how long till the first session or the first round of med students were involved? And how is this position funded within your organization? Dr. Clay, if you want to go ahead and go first.
Awesome, thanks. So I was fortunate, I kind of came on with Dr. Boehner kind of leading the charge ahead of me. So he has been here for probably 10 years at least before I was, and had kind of started the ball rolling with the College of Medicine and had a lot of elective content with them. And I kind of filled the gap from that standpoint as far as like, let's see what we can make curricular, let's see what we can get paid for. He was fortunate with his years prior to me of getting a UME medical director or ultrasound directorship started, where it's a funded position for him. But as we've built up our curriculum, as many of you know, it's really hard to run things by yourself. And so frequently they'll fund one person and then you're like, but I need more people on my team. And so I think that's where I came in, is trying to use the language that the college used. So they have positions called expert educators. And I was like, can I be an ultrasound expert educator? Can I do it in this part of the curriculum or that part of the curriculum? And using things that already existed. That seemed to be a much easier way to get things funded. We did it the wrong way, so don't do it the way we did. Is we started teaching the courses first and then went back and asked for funding, and they're like, well, you're already doing it. So like, don't give the milk away, make them buy the cow first, because otherwise it's really hard to backtrack, I think. We did take a lot of the extracurricular sessions and the feedback from them and say, we have 2/3 of your medical students in these extracurricular courses. They're not getting credit for it. We're spending X amount of hours. So we did collect data from that, which I think was helpful. We now have 3 courses plus a longitudinal course and a new elective starting this winter for the medical students, which I think is a testament. And we keep going back to them like, hey, this helps with recruiting. So you need to know what they value. So they value recruiting, they value students being happy because students pay their bills. And so getting your students to advocate for you, I think, is a big help in getting funded in the medical education realm. So I'll stop there for now.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Amy, you want to discuss how you established this at Loyola?
Yeah, definitely. So fortunately, I kind of stepped in from one of my prior colleagues who got a pilot going through the Stritch School of Medicine, probably about 2 years before I officially started to take over. So I think she's kind of got it going around 2013. So not too long before. Really what she was doing was getting the ball rolling through the dean, getting approval, started to work through the anatomy course and established maybe a few workshops for the first year medical students. And then she actually left to do her ultrasound fellowship and essentially knew that I was interested in ultrasound. So kind of put it in my lap to do that. And it was fine since I was actually kind of involved with a lot of the workshops prior to this. So from that standpoint, again, it was still kind of piloted. I expanded it from that standpoint and really try to kind of make it a more established curriculum at that point, but it really wasn't officially kind of integrated and recognized as it is right now, which is a vertically integrated curriculum, which is over the 4 years for until 2018. So I took over 2015 and 2018. So it took about essentially 3 extra years to be officially recognized by the school. So essentially what this meant that I kind of was doing this under my own free time while working full time. So they essentially said, you kind of have to prove yourself. You have to prove the worth of the curriculum before it's actually funded. So now it currently is funded by the medical school, and I do get some buy down, actually a pretty significant amount of buy down to run the curriculum. So, but yeah, it fortunately was very much supported by our school. We didn't really have to try too hard in terms of proving to them that ultrasound was kind of a critical piece that they needed to teach the medical students. We are very, very fortunate, and still very fortunate, that our dean is very kind of progressive from that standpoint. It was just a matter of, okay, is this going to be an official part of the curriculum and recognized versus just kind of spattered in and integrated as like a couple workshops within some of the other courses like anatomy and then pathology or so.
Great, thank you. So the next question we're going to address is, where do you get the supplies from? Are the machines purchased by the medical school? Do you pay the models? Who does the teaching and hands-on portions, and are they compensated?
3 is, where do you get your supplies from? Are the machines purchased by the medical school, or do they pay the models? And who does the teaching portions when they are and are they compensated? So the supplies, we are very lucky. At the school level, we have a person who handles not just for ultrasound, but throughout the entire facilities of the med school. We have a designated person who handles supplies, equipment, room setup, all the physical things of the classrooms. And he is amazing. We've been working very close with him since the very beginning. He handles all the storage of the equipment, also not just the storage and the maintenance, but also kind of the tech portion. So he will make sure that all the cords, the wires, the probes are in working order. He makes sure that all the classrooms are set up. When we do have scan sessions, so he orders all the mats, all the pillows, all the gels, all the paper towels, all the gloves, hand sanitizers. He's kind of in charge of basically all the supplies that are used on the school facilities. So we work very closely with him. And then also the room setups. How do you want the tables to be set up? How do you want the projectors to be set up? He handles everything. So I don't actually know how much that costs. It goes straight to the school, so I have no idea what the budget is for that. The machines are purchased by the medical school. This is, again, all purchased on the initial startup fund from that family foundation. In the very beginning, we bought 8 machines, but within 2 years, 4 of those machines had to be traded in because no one knew how to use them. And so after that, we acquired 8 new machines. So we had a total of 12 within the first 2 years to part devices. And now we use butterflies in addition to that. So we have a fleet of about 12 cart machines, 60 plus butterflies that we do a loan in and return kind of mechanism. It's not one pro per student. It's only a loan and return process for students who are on their medicine clerkship. So in terms of devices, that's how that's handled. And we do use standardized patients, what we call SPs, for some of the sessions that we use in the pre-clerkship space. Most of our pre-clerkship space is pretty controlled. And so we do have a policy written early on in our school, just from my experience, students not being comfortable with certain areas being scanned. So anywhere from the xiphoid to the clavicle requires an SP, and anywhere from the navel to the mid-thigh requires an SP. Everything else, the students can scan each other. So we have a designated standardized patient program at our medical school. And there's a whole director and a program around that, and they staff and supply all the SPs to all the different courses, whether it's like a simulation class or an interview class, whatever it is, or ultrasound. It's all coming from the same pool of SPs. So we do not handle our own SP recruitment and payment. There's a designated SP program just for that. And so we just let the SP director know which sessions we need SPs for, what criteria, what kind of anatomy, BMI levels and limits, and et cetera, age limits. We can make all the requirements that we need for each of these sessions. So we tailor that each year depending on the feedback that we get from the students. And who does the teaching or hands-on portions? So right now, the huge chunk of our teaching is done by our 4th actually third and fourth year medical students, or upperclassmen. In the pool of students, there's a very highly skilled self-selected group, small group, but enough, probably about 15 or so students who are doing the teaching. For the underclassmen, so the first and second years are mostly being taught by third and fourth years. And so we have a very nice cohort of TAs, the teaching core, as we call them, and a smaller subgroup of more highly skilled TAs that we designate as chief TAs, whose only requirement to be a chief TA is that they have had to have completed the ultrasound rotation with us in their sub-I. And they do get paid, also probably from the same fund. So, but it's a more prestigious role than all the other TA duties within the med school, I think, biased, but that's how our teaching is mostly done. I would say about 90% of it is done by our student TAs, which was established in 2019. And it's been going very well since then.
Dr. Creagh, do you want to discuss how you all?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So we have a skills lab, which I was actually trying to, while Wilma was talking, pull up our form. That's directly below, fortunately, our ultrasound offices. And they have about 15 machines and then a various amount of trash trainers. And they kind of run everything from a purchasing. They ask our advice. They don't always like our advice, but they do ask for it as far as like what we want, how good are the machines, how usable are they from a clinical standpoint. The students don't really care. So we have about 12 cart-based machines, and then we have 100 EchoNoose that were donated as part of a research project that they can check out. So handhelds, and then we've actually gotten pretty elaborate as far as like rules and regulations around it, just preventative and reactive to various events as far as like who can scan, when they can scan, who can be scanned. The students can go into the room 9 to 5 and self-scan. We also have an Eve that they can scan on, and they can check out any task trainers. We do not purchase them. The College of Medicine partially funds the skills lab, as does the medical center. So it's jointly funded, and they have their own independent budget. So thankfully we're not the ones paying for that. And then from a model standpoint, I put a link in the chat. We use our students as our models. They can get credit for modeling, but it's not mandatory that they model. So there are alternatives to modeling for credit for various courses that they're doing, whether it's their honors ultrasound elective or their ultrasound advanced competency. And it's really funny because right now all they get is like a certificate for a lot of these courses. Like there's no grade associated with them. They get very mad if they don't get their hours and very anxious about getting their hours. They'll be like, you can have quadruple hours if you show up tonight. Like somebody misbooked my session that's at 5 o'clock today and had it for Thursday. So we sent out an all call to the students. We're like, triple hours if you can show up for 2 hours at 5 o'clock tonight, and you get immediate responses. And we have like what we call a TSUP Bill of Rights. So where the students who are modeling know what they're signing up for. So we've made pre-made videos for all of the students. Like, this is what's going to be scanned if you're signing up for this session. This is where the probe will be. This is how we'll be draping you, so that they're not coming into anything they're not comfortable with. So if all they want to expose is their elbow down, then you can sign up for those sessions exclusively. And we let them know who is going to be scanning them, which I think is really important too. So if it's going to be faculty, we don't want them to be in a situation where they wouldn't like it. So if they want to go into surgery and it's a surgery attending group, like maybe they don't want to do that session, or maybe they do because it's free, like one-on-one mentorship and like time with the person whose schedule is super booked, and they love that too. So I actually put in, because we actually did a study looking at the students and how much they learned just by laying there. And it's really significant, which is why we haven't gone to paid SPs, is because the students actually benefit quite a bit from being scanned. Over a summer, we actually had a student who had never actually scanned herself, but had been a model for a year. And she was teaching the thoracic surgeons how to find the aorta because she'd been scanned so many times. And it was just really beautiful to watch happen. You're like, this is why we do what we do. So we've found that the student modeling program is like mutually beneficial, and that they actually acquire quite a bit of knowledge. So which makes it good because we don't have to pay them. for any of their time, but they get the benefit of like learning and mentorship. And they tend to be the students we know a lot better. So they get letters at the end of things. So there are benefits to them for sure. The supplies, we also have a box in the ED for any expired procedural supplies. So that we bring up and utilize in the skills lab so that we don't have to worry about having to purchase specific things necessarily on a regular basis.
Great, thank you. Amy, you wanna?
Yeah, so so in terms of our supplies, fortunately, we have our clinical skills learning center, kind of our sim education center that provides almost all the supplies that we need during our sessions. So we hold all of the sessions down in the large labs down there. They have all the tables. They bring in the beds, any towels, gel, gloves if people want any gloves. And in terms of how much that costs, I don't know. We just kind of tell them, we've worked with them for so many years that they basically know what we need and just need the dates at this point. When it comes to ultrasounds, it sounds like we are slightly a little under-resourced compared to everybody else so far that's spoken. We have, I think, 5 ultrasounds that are cart-based and 10 butterflies, but we don't really use those during our larger workshop sessions that we have for the first and second years, as well as some of the skills days for the third and fourth year clerkships. But the butterflies are available for the students to use when they're like on the internal medicine floors, and they can use those to kind of do scans on rounds or when they're taking care of their patients. So we have that. And in order to kind of keep up with the kind of needs that we have, because we have all of the students come through over a span generally of 3 and 3.5 hours for each class year. So that's like 170 or 175 students. We will get some additional ultrasound cart-based ones from one of our reps. So usually we work with like Sonocytes, then one of our close reps that have offered some of their educational loaners for us just to help supplement. And then some of the machines are purchased. So we recently purchased a new ultrasound at my request because some of the other ones have been kind of getting a little older and a little tired. So they've been able to provide that with some limitations, obviously. Obviously, I'd like to have more, but usually it's like one every couple of years. In terms of the models, the way it initially started was we were using the students that rotated through that group and requested to have somebody act as a model. Obviously, there's a couple issues that we ran, one being that student ended up maybe not being able to do any hands-on scanning if nobody else in their group was willing to be also a model. Also, very few, but it kind of came up and became an area of concern, which kind of was impetus for change, was, is this a more sensitive area that they didn't feel comfortable being scanned, and therefore we moved to some SPs. And the SPs are provided also by the Clinical Learning Center, which is like a pool similarly to any of the other physical exam work sessions that the medical school may have, but obviously just for ultrasound. We also will make a particular request, generally, if there's something in the abdomen, probably of lower BMI, we ask them potentially not to eat for a couple hours ahead of time, just to make some of the scanning slightly easier for our learners. And initially they weren't compensated, but they've most recently been compensated just to kind of act as an incentive to be an SP. And a lot of our SPs end up being actually our fourth year medical students, because they have a lot of free time and they are realizing that they need money, and whether it be for interviews or for the following year. So it ends up being really interesting because, again, I know Creagh was mentioning how there's this whole benefit of the SP models, and they end up picking up on a lot of the instruction as well, and sometimes we'll end up teaching some of the rotators or some of the students that rotate through their group, if, for instance, their instructor had to step away for any reason. And then in terms of our instructors, so initially many of their instructors were faculty, and actually the first good number of years ended up being faculty. Has then started to trickle in more into our residents. Monika definitely has offered many of her residents and fellows to be instructors around as well. And then I've offered the students to be instructors so long as they've completed the ultrasound elective with me. So at least I can kind of make sure that their skills are up to snuff when it comes to being able to teach. So in terms of compensation, it's all just a big thank you from me. I would love to have an additional thank you and like a little reward, but that's going to be my next ask from the school at this point.
Great, thank you. So for the last part, do you all think that this has helped to get more students exposed to emergency medicine? For you both, how much of a time commitment is this? And we've already talked about kind of the residents helping with education. And then have you incorporated any other technology, especially things like SonoSim that has their own educational platforms into what you expose the learners to? And if you want to start off, Creagh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this has helped a lot. I think getting people exposed to EM, we've actually found we needed to have less EM people, if that makes sense, which because we found we had a lot of students who didn't want to go into EM and maybe wanted exposure to that mentorship or needed to see the relevance to their fields. So we started a system called the Communities of Practice, where we try to bring in champions from other fields as well, to make it more appealing to the masses of students. And so there'll be faculty and residents. We try to bring them into relevant courses. So if we're teaching cardiology, obviously we'll have the cardiologist there with us. If we're teaching lung, we try to get the MICU involved, aorta, family medicine, just so they can see like how this, even if you don't want to do EM, how this can be impactful to your future career, regardless of your specialty. I do think it gives us an opportunity to get really close with the students, so they may like choose EM because they get to know you on a much more personal basis. But I've had plenty of people like who I've mentored who end up in other fields. I think that the time is tricky because I think students, once they like get in, they are like never ending in their desires. And I love them, but I think you have to be really rigid with your time. I found that out early, that like you could do this all day, every day, and still not meet everybody's needs. Like we have our USIG who I chat with at least once a day. Like we finally started a group me chat because that was much easier than like all the meetings. I mean, most schools have 400 to 800 students. And so like you could truly be doing assessments and curriculum development constantly. So I think knowing how valuable your time is and what your own limits are, it's definitely changed over time for me. And I think once you get an established curriculum, your time goes down a lot. But when you're trying to build, we also have a website that I think has been helpful, where I can refer people to that. And we do a lot of pre-recorded videos for the canned lectures so that most of our time with them can be spent in a more meaningful manner, like scanning, so that I'm not giving you the same cardiology talk I've given 500 times. Like, review your cards talk and then come in and do hands-on echo with me. We try to double or triple dip, so get as many different types of students. So maybe my first years are just learning anatomy, but I'll have like my third years there learning basic pathology, my fourth years there helping teach. So trying to like have one faculty hour be as valuable as possible, I think has been really helpful. So we have like a basic, intermediate, and advanced group. We try to have them all run a similar session at the same time, where one faculty can be there and kind of cross cover, and they can help each other as well. It's really cool to watch them give each other advice too. Like, oh, you're in cards right now. Like, this is really helpful, or use this resource. So it's been really good for, I think, the students too. My residents help when they remember to read their emails and answer invites. I think we have our fellows help quite a bit. Our fellows run a lot of these sessions with us. It's part of their 20 hours of teaching as part of the requirements. So we use that as well. We used to have one of the virtual platforms, and honestly, between cost and the length of the didactics on there, we stopped using it. We use the Vimeo lectures through AUS for our advanced learners. And then we made our own pre-recorded content. And then we also use the AUS question bank for our fourth years as well on elective. But I found that my institution hates subscription-based anything, and which most of these platforms are. And so they can't budget for that. They don't get a tangible product once they've paid for something. And they don't love that. So we've gone away from most of those and just made our own content.
Got it. Great. Thank you. Amy?
Yeah, so I would say Stritch has been one of those schools that have always tended to be really popular amongst the EM bound students. So to say that the ultrasound curriculum actually has allowed more exposure to EM, I don't know if I would love to say that that's the case, but I don't, it's hard to say, because I think our numbers that have gone into EM have pretty much stayed the same pre and then post ultrasound. So the only thing I guess I would say is maybe it got the students exposed to EM faculty earlier, since we were having a lot of the instructors be a lot of EM people. But just from sheer volume and my needs for instructors, I actually tapped into a lot of the other specialties that do use point of care ultrasound. So we actually had some champions in medicine and critical care from the ICU. So I was able to kind of recruit their help, rheumatology, even ortho, sports med for a lot of the MSK sessions. I know that cardiology and radiology have always like expressed interest in wanting to teach, but for some reason they've never been able to be available during the session. So, but it has been a very EM heavy in terms of who the students have been exposed to for the most part. But I don't, it may have like helped solidify if a student was thinking EM or kind of like brought it up. But I remember meeting a lot of the students as a first year, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm really interested in EM. And by the time they get to the fourth year, they've kind of switched gears. And I think it's just a matter of exposure anyways to the other clerkships. So I just kind of am happy that they are still using ultrasound or using it in some capacity. But yeah, so in terms of like time commitment, agree that the initial years of kind of forming the content, the establishing, the formatting, all that kind of the logistics aspect of it all is a huge time commitment. I think I probably spent, I don't even want to say, it's like, 5 hours every week, just trying to get things established. And at that time, I was pretty much the only kind of ultrasound heavy faculty in my entire that was involved in this. So it was kind of like a solo job. And it wasn't until like I think 2 or 3 years ago that I actually was able to get another ultrasound faculty from EM. So yeah, so it's now that things have kind of gotten underway, I've been able to kind of scale back a little bit, but it's always replaced with something else. Like I would love to kind of incorporate more scan shifts then. And so therefore, whatever my time was with, doing scan review or anything like that ends up being replaced by something else and something a little bit more face-to-face, which I actually enjoy much more. So a lot of the workshops during first and second year, that stuff has all been done. That was a lot of the lift earlier, but now it's kind of gone on autopilot. Like I don't even really need to be there anymore. So now it's kind of focused more on like the smaller sessions, like one-on-one work teaching or like with a couple of the students. I'll kind of tap back into like how the EM residents play a role in this. So not only do they help with the workshops, we have actually incorporated a mandatory minimum of teaching for them. And the second year residents, because we're again, I've kind of worked with the residents as well and made it a little bit of a longitudinal curriculum through the 3 years. The second year residents then have a mandatory scan session with the medical students that are on the ultrasound elective, and there's a maximum of 2. So it not only kind of reinforces their core applications as well, but it allows the students to also get a little bit of teaching from somebody who's a little bit closer in their education than it is for me. And then I also step in and do some scanning with them as well. So yeah, so that's kind of like a new thing that's up and coming for this upcoming year. Also, earlier on when we were trying to figure out how can we use like what technology is out there, we had purchased SonoSim and found that as much as the possibility was there, it just didn't really quite fit in with the large scale of, like I said, 170 students per class, since it was one laptop based, and we didn't necessarily feel it was, well, there's budget, and then there was whether or not is it really worth it to purchase that big subscription that they were offering. So we actually recently just dropped that subscription as well and started looking into the other SIM-based ones, but unfortunately, again, is not within budget at this time. We do have some butterflies, but again, it's more for some of the lower resourced areas around the hospital. So like on the general medicine floors that will take the butterflies, but in the EM side of things, we have a specific cart-based ultrasound that is purely just for education. So EM clerkship is mandatory for the fourth year medical students. So when they come in, we really encourage them to use that ultrasound from that. But otherwise, in other terms of technology, we haven't done that. But we do use a lot of the other videos that a lot of the other that are available for free, for sure, for them to review.
Great, thank you so much. Again, I wanted to thank Dr. Chan, Dr. Bougler, and Dr. Kule for joining us today and kind of discussing their development and robust medical education program involvement. I definitely think that this is a huge area that a lot of schools are going to be interested in. And I think within the next few years, students are actually going to ask for this when they go and interview at various schools. So I think it's definitely going to be something that a lot of the schools that have this already integrated and developed, it's going to be a huge pull for students to join that particular school. I did want to move on to part two. Part two is going to be led by Dr. Allison Peterson. She is our current ultrasound fellow. And this is going to be just a really quick discussion, just a wrap up of the two articles, because I do want to have some time for all of us to ask any questions for our panelists, as well as any questions that arise in regards to medical education and integration of ultrasound. So Dr. Kule, if you want to go ahead.
Oh, you mean me, Allison?
I'm sorry, Dr. Peterson, sorry. You want to go ahead?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Peterson. I'm the ultrasound fellow at Resurrection, and I just wanted to take you all through these two articles that were sent out. So we're kind of pivoting from medical education in med schools to now ultrasound education for residents. And kind of the major thing is, how can we do better? What are some themes and trends that we can think about as we are teaching residents ultrasound? Couple key topics are standardization of what we're teaching, having learners retain the information that we're teaching, making things fun and enjoyable, and then also getting some buy-in, having the learners be engaged. So the first article that was sent out, actually, Dr. Liu is on this article, so feel free to interject at any point in time, but this is the SonoGames article that was in the Journal of Ultrasound Medicine in 2018, so it's a few years old, but I thought it was very relevant. Okay, so the objectives of this study were determining the effectiveness of using a competitive event such as SonoGames on both short and long-term education about point-of-care ultrasound. And the other objective was looking at the attitudes of participants as well as the program directors regarding ultrasound training. The method, so there was essentially two prospective studies. There were surveys that were sent out, one to residents that participated, as well as program directors. That was people that were participating in SAEM in 2016 in New Orleans. So that was the SonoGames event that this is all taking place. And then there was a 5-point Likert scale that was assessing these few things: perceptions and attitudes about ultrasound, changes in self-reported knowledge and competency, effects on their clinical use, as well as kind of the overall impact of having a competitive format for educational purposes. So the results were, there was 73 residents that responded and 42 program directors. And the participants, they thought that overall, the competitive format was very educational. It improved their ultrasound knowledge and that their clinical use of ultrasound increased, as well as it was very enthusiastic for them. There's a similar trend in terms of the program directors, just to a lesser extent, that it increased knowledge, that clinical use increased. And also just to point out that 44% said that SonoGames actually inspired them to create their own events at their home institutions, which is pretty unique. This is essentially a big table from the article that's showing overall what this did to the education. And you can see that in terms of for program directors as well as residents, there's a lot of strongly increasing, somewhat increasing their enthusiasm, their knowledge, and their clinical use. It didn't really decrease significantly for these people, but I'm a pretty visual person. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that there's actually a positive correlation between the number of rounds that the residents participated and like the effects that it made on their clinical knowledge and their experience. So the more that they were involved in SonoGames, and if they participated in multiple rounds, there was this positive correlation there. So overall, the conclusion was that a competitive game-based format is actually a really effective educational tool regarding ultrasound, as well as residents are really enthusiastic and improve their knowledge and clinical use. There were some considerations and limitations. So there was only a 25% response rate for the residents that received the survey. So only 25% actually filled it out and sent it back in. And then in terms of the program directors, there was a 21% response rate. So we're losing a lot of responses from program directors and residents that also attended Sono games in New Orleans in 2016. It's also important to understand that the data from this one event was just extrapolated from one single event. So it would be interesting to see over multiple events if there was similar trends or if there was any differences. Also, there's probably a bias that residents and program directors that are actively involved in ultrasound or passionate about ultrasound were more likely probably to fill out those surveys. Jumping into Article 2, I know we're short on time. So this is variability in ultrasound education among EM residents. And this was done in Western Journal of Emergency Medicine in 2010, coming out of the University of Utah. So the objectives here were to evaluate current ultrasound practices among EM residency programs and the need for further formalization of emergency ultrasound. So the methods here, they sent a survey to all of the ultrasound directors at the EM programs, and they surveyed these programs specifically about the curriculum and their residency proficiency requirements. So the overall results, you can see there's a bunch of numbers here, but essentially the average number of scans that these programs said was the level of competency for their residents was 137. 44% of the programs responded. 64% said that they require 150 scans. And I'm going to get to some visuals in the next couple of slides. Overall, 21% of programs said they have self-directed ultrasound training. And 54% felt like they were meeting the goals for their resident ultrasound curriculum. So here's just some visuals. You can see that the overwhelming majority of required ultrasound scans for residency programs is somewhere between that 150 to 200. Of note, there's quite a few programs that have less than 100 scans to determine competency. And then on the right side, you can see that the structure of the ultrasound programs, you can see that most of these programs are having structured programs. They're also having an ultrasound rotation required. So that's the overwhelming majority for most EM residency programs. And then here we just have some more visualizations. So there's some variability in the number of weeks that residents are doing their ultrasound rotation, from 2 weeks to 4 weeks to greater than 4 weeks. I kind of chuckle at this because the types of media used, DVD is an option. So clearly this is from a few years ago, but just having some different modalities in the way that we're engaging learners and teaching them. And then at the bottom left, you can see that there's differences in the number of faculty that are actually credentialed in ultrasound at all of these programs. And the hours of instruction, you can see that it's kind of split up between didactics as well as hands-on instruction. And then in terms of all of the different scans that they're doing, the bigger ones, the more common ones, most programs are all doing, the more difficult exams, statistical nerve block, less programs are doing. So essentially, this study, it just showed that there's a lot of discrepancies for many different facets of emergency medicine ultrasound curriculum and residency programs. So the overall number of scans, the average was 137. ACEP suggests between 150 to 300. And then there really needs to be some sort of standardization. And then I just have, I forgot about this. So just to keep in mind, about half, a little less than half of the programs responded to this survey. 40% of the programs that did respond had an ultrasound fellowship program there. And again, I think that this is similar to the other article, that programs that are ultrasound heavy, have more faculty, or more involved and energetic, are probably more likely to respond than those that do not. And then I just pulled in ACEP's policy statement. Basically, the thing that I found really interesting, because I didn't know this, is that they're suggesting between 150 to 300 scans. And it said based off of if you were in a community setting versus an academic setting, they're leaving that sort of open to different residency programs. And that the 12 core competency applications that I have highlighted here, they can kind of vary depending on what your residency program site looks like. So a lot of this still, even these articles were done a few years ago, there's a lot of variability in what ACEP recommends and where we kind of still are at today. So overall, I know we don't have much time, but what are the numbers required at your institution? Do these studies sort of change your perception or how you would practice? I know we were talking about Sono games earlier, but are there events at your institutions? And then what things do you do to sort of engage and make residency ultrasound education, is enthusiastic and clinically relevant? Okay, I think
Thank you so much, Dr. Peterson. So now I just wanted to open up the floor to everyone. If there were particular questions that people had in regards to integrating medical education within residency, within medical schools, especially any questions for our panelists, any programs that are new and up and coming in regards to questions that you have or things that you've encountered that have made this process harder for your institution.
I mean, we've just started our journey with this, and I have to really shout out to, everyone from Creagh, Amy, Rachel, Wilma, just really big pioneers in this space. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for everything you're publishing and helping out with being mentors. We are finding that it is just a long time between every little step. We just got approved to purchase our machines, but the actual act of purchasing something is multiple months, if not years, in the making as they find funding. So I would just encourage anyone else who is venturing into this space to just make sure that you have a hefty bolus of patience. And I appreciate the links for if incidental findings are found on models, whether it be students or SPs, because that's a very important aspect that could have medical legal implications.
I think one thing too is remember, not usually is one user group. It's not like these are the med student machines. And so what I found helpful is if you're like, this is $250,000, but I'm asking you for 75, right? Like that tends to go over a lot better when you're like, I'm giving you a discount. I've marked it up 500%, but here's your discount. So getting like the CMO, the DIO, and the medical school to share purchasing. That's what we did for our institutional ultrasound education program, where I'm truly just focusing on teaching faculty to get them qualified for credentialing, mostly non-EM faculty. But to fund that educational initiative and the faculty for that, I went to the College of Medicine. I was like, your students are missing out on rounds. They can't experience ultrasound anywhere except for the emergency department. That's really sad, isn't it? I'd hate for them to give you bad evaluations. How about you help co-fund this, right? But it makes sense, right? Because if I teach the faculty, then the faculty teach the students, everybody wins. And so I actually got the CMO and the College of Medicine to split my $350,000 ask. And I think that I have learned, if you make them feel like they're getting a deal, that tends to go a long way. I've also learned to anything you're asking for, ask for an FTEs, not numbers, because your FTE will don't say I need $30,000, say I need a 0.05 FTE, because as your pay changes, that 30,000 becomes less and less and less, which typically will happen with your promotion or just like your yearly advancing. And so just kind of keep that in mind. It's something I didn't learn until like the last few years. And I'm like, oh, my time is going away. And my time is going away because my time is getting more expensive. So I think that's really important to think about.
I think it would also be interesting to survey some of these med students who have completed the program and see how much the ultrasound curricular has influenced them, or even them joining a residency afterwards and that initial experience. We have fourth year med student rotators that it's not a core rotation, it's just for an elective. And so some of them come in and they've used ultrasound extensively within their medical education, whereas others have never used an ultrasound. Obviously in the emergency department, if they're doing that as their elective, they get a lot of exposure hopefully to it. But it'd just be interesting to see how this is, when it's integrated into the med schools, how actually better prepared they are for any kind of point of care ultrasound within the specialty they choose. Is there anyone else who's involved in any kind of medical education ultrasound integration that has any other comments or anything? Rachel, do you have anything to add about your article in regards to anything that Allison was discussing?
Oh, just a comment in that it was actually really hard to get that article published. And so we know the impact of things like Sono Games, like just the fact that people keep doing it, the fact that we keep increasing. Like when we started Sono Games, it started with 20 programs, and now we're up to 92 programs participated last week. And there are more international programs that keep asking us for help in doing that. So like that itself proves the impact of that style of education. But it's really hard to write and quantify on paper. So that's one of the things we're struggling with. Like, do we keep publishing on this kind of thing again? But if anyone has any ideas on how to do that and measure impact, I'm all ears. It's also really hard to like publish something without being like, we did this and this was the game that we did, you know, because otherwise it ends up being like a 2-sentence paper, which won't fly.
Yeah, for our ultrasound workshop, we've definitely integrated something that's similar with Sono Wars. And it's usually our residents' favorite workshop that they take part in, and even the faculty. So it's definitely something that they all really, really enjoy, especially for their education.
And I'm going to go on to say that others copied us right now. So now there's Sim Wars, right? And that started after Sono Games. And like, you know, there's other things that people are doing that I think show impact, but it's just kind of hard to prove.
Well, Dan, I think that brings us to the 2 p.m. Central Time. So again, thank you all for attending. We are going to have the methods consult immediately following. So if anybody has any research ideas, needs research assistance in regards to a proposal or steps that you're getting stuck in, we will be on to allow for those questions. And then also don't forget, next month, we will have our last journal club of the year. It will be hosted by Dan here, and it's going to involve procedures and peripheral IV ultrasound guidance. So if anyone is interested in serving as a small group moderator, we can definitely use those. We're going to go back to the regular format for that. As well as if anyone's interested, the link will be sent out to sign up for the Zoom session. Thank you all again.